Good morning and welcome to China Now, where we bring you the pulse of modern China and its evolving role in the global community. I am your host, Makiza Latifa, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. In today's episode is Overlap, an executive program of the prestigious China Academy. This program is shaping the next generation of global leaders by connecting expertise, fostering collaboration, and bridging the gap between China and the rest of the world. In this segment, we'll dive into the insights and innovations emerging from China and explore how it is influencing international dialogue. This episode features a conversation between Zhou Li from Wave Media and his guest Zephyr, a YouTube content creator who's also a current affairs commentator, and Vijay Prashad, the executive director of the Tricontinental Institute, also an Indian historian and journalist. Stay with us as this episode is packed with stories and ideas that matter. Let's get started.
I suppose no introduction needed. VJ, round face. Oh no, Z, right? Round face.
Z.
And come you got a round face. I don't see
Yeah,
that.
nice to be with you. Yeah, nice to be with you. You have to have a little formality. You can't just, Yeah, okay.
I can do
Yes.
Okay. You can pray in the evangelical style. Yeah.
I'm going to start with a gossip. Because this is what we were chatting yesterday. You said you like, the reason why it's these two talking is because yesterday you said you admire each other. You love him for being such a happy character.
Yes, I love
him. And we also love you. You
No,
know that.
he's happy. He's a great interviewer because he's so relaxed.
Yeah, well, that's it. And then
He'll ask me in a really relaxed way, when do you think the world is going to end?
No, and then you followed up by saying that you hate losing your temper, and then the only time you lost your temper was at the COP meeting.
Yes.
So I dug it out. Is that it?
Yeah, okay.
The United States, 4-5% of the world's population,
yeah.
still uses
Is that it?
25%
Is that the time you were
of the world's
referring to?
resources.
Okay, so it went viral, both overseas and here in China too. What was behind that?
Well, there were two things that happened. One is that this was during the COVID pandemic.
That's 2
So-
years ago, no?
Maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
So it was in the heart of the pandemic,
Yeah.
21 maybe.
Yeah.
And so I had to go to the Glasgow airport to get the COVID test to fly the next day. And I was in the queue and there was a bunch of men in suits in front of me. And there was, they were talking about things, and there was a really nice guy toward the end of the group. And he turned to me and said, I was in my own sort of jacket. And then he said, so what were you doing at the COP? Because I had all the, the million badges. And I said, well, I'm a reporter and I came to talk about what I'd seen in Mozambique. And he said, what's going on in Mozambique? So I said, well, in Cabo Delgado, in the northern province, there's offshore, there's a big oil find. And two oil companies, French Total and ExxonMobil, have the rights for it. But the people in Cabo Delgado are really poor. And so they started an insurgency. And, the French sent the Rwandan troops to intervene and whatnot. So I was telling him this story, with feeling because I'd been there.
Yeah.
And
So that was before the clip.
this was just before the clip.
Okay.
And I was just saying, look, and then he says to me, he had already told me that these guys work for an oil services company from Texas. Really nice guy, I must say. He was listening, and then 2-3 other guys turned to listen, and I was telling the story. And then one of the guys said to me, what's interesting? He said, it's really important what you're doing. And he didn't say this patronizingly.
Yeah.
He said it sincerely. He said, it's really important what you're doing. People don't know about these things and so on. He said, and keep doing what you're doing. But he said, nobody cares. And then, we went in and I told the nurse, who was a working class woman from Scotland, this is what this guy said. And she was, full of abuses because she had just tested them before. Anyway, I went back to the hall, and just before me was the scientist from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and she gave a presentation talking about how countries like India and China are just damaging the planet because they're producing all these things, and there's coal burning
There's so many of us.
yeah, and there's too many people, and I was just sitting there. I was thinking of the guy who just said to me, "You're doing important work, but nobody cares." And then this person saying to me that, "Look, it's China and India that are responsible," and there was like a fire.
Yeah.
And then the moderator turned to me and said, "So, what do you think?" And I just lost it. I mean, normally I never lose it because I think anger is the wrong way to
Yeah.
deal with the world. The world is beautiful, and people are so interesting, and they have such compelling stories. And why would you?
Yeah.
But this just drove me off the cliff, and well,
But that went viral.
Yeah, that went viral.
Millions of views.
Yeah.
but it's bad that anger gets a lot of views and love gets zero.
Yeah.
Like you want to talk about humanity, and nobody wants to watch that.
But he doesn't seem that angry.
Well, for me, that was anger.
That was anger for you.
Yeah, for me.
I think we're too used to the U.S. election campaign videos that this is not anger to us. I mean, this is very poised.
Okay, I felt angry. I felt really angry because why? Because when these people talk about the climate, and when they talk about how, let's say, China or India or Indonesia, are responsible for so many greenhouse gases, there's three things that really bother me about that. One is everybody knows from the statistics that the West has exhausted the carbon budget.
Yeah.
Over the course of 200 years, they've ruined the environment. We know that. Secondly, we know that they have outsourced production to Indonesia, India, and mainly China. So China is producing goods and services, but a lot of goods.
We're polluting on your behalf.
On your behalf, exactly. That's the second thing. And the third thing is, what do you expect? Half the Indian population doesn't have proper facilities. So should we stop developing so that the planet is saved? In the West, it's okay. You have 4 refrigerators in a house. You can have 12 TVs. You can do whatever. But a house in India is not supposed to have electricity. Like that third thing, that drives me crazy because what motivates us into doing this is that we feel for other people. What's the best kind of journalist? The best kind of journalist is a person who says, I want to tell the stories of people whose stories are never heard. That's the best kind of journalist. The worst kind of journalist is a journalist who just wants to report what politicians are saying. That's not a journalist. That's a stenographer in any political system. That's just a person who takes the press release and repeats it. I'm interested in, like you guys are, in going to see what are the things that are not being talked about. Whose feelings are not brought into the public domain. That's really journalism. And so we feel for people who have no electricity. I mean, what was remarkable, the greatest story the last 10 years in the world, eradication of absolute poverty in China.
Yeah.
That's the greatest story in the last 10 years. Tomorrow somebody could go to Mars. In my opinion, that's not the greatest story. On my list of 10 greatest stories, eradication of absolute poverty, I don't know what God would have to appear to push this off the list of greatest stories. It's an amazing story. Why? Because there are households where people were not able to eat properly, where they had no ability to read at night, no electricity. All of that is transcended. That is, socially, that's a miracle in social terms.
Yeah.
And that's why it really bothered me when people say, well, China, India, they should stop developing because it's ruining the planet. God, no.
So he travels around in an RV, going into some of the remotest places in China. You want to talk about that?
So I just want to talk about the video, the viral one, the first, because it inspired a lot of people, social influencers from developing countries like Vietnam, they found out that their country is still importing foreign trash. Not only like normal ones, but actually medical trash. Because for those who are doing international trades, have a container going, for example, from US to China to get goods back to US, but when it comes back, it's empty. So whatever you get in the container, it sounds like it's a basic bonanza, right? Bonanza. You can do everything. So they carry trash back to China. What's happening now is China banned importing foreign trash, I believe 3 years ago or something. But they are now exporting trash to Vietnam, to Turkey. What Turkey is doing right now is throwing containers from Germany actually, and the World Bank or whatever, I think IMF actually gave Germany the best country on recycling trash. How they recycle is just ship those containers to Turkey, and now Turkey is shipping those to Haiphong in Vietnam. So Vietnamese, knowing that they went outrageous, just like you. So they're normal, kindly, lovely people. But every, I think, patriot, or even you're not patriot, you're just living on this land, whatever stuff they don't want, get on your land, burn, and get in your soil, then it lasts forever.
Yeah.
In fact, it's really interesting. In the 1990s, one of the most respected economists in the United States, Lawrence Summers, who's well known in China, Lawrence Summers joined the Clinton administration. But before the Clinton administration, he was working at the World Bank. He wrote a memorandum, completely serious, okay? This sounds like a modest proposal by Jonathan Swift, which was written in the 17th century, where Swift said that the Irish produce a lot of children and there's hunger, so why not eat the children? His text is called A Modest Proposal. It was a really powerful expose of British imperialism in Ireland. Well, Lawrence Summers wrote a serious text, a memorandum for the World Bank. It's not like Jonathan Swift, a serious text. What he argued was Africa is money deficient. Okay, follow the logic. Africa is money deficient. Okay, the United States is trash.
Sufficient.
More than sufficient, has excess trash. So the US should send its trash to Africa and Africa can earn money for that. Okay, this was a serious World Bank memorandum.
That's like trash is America's comparative advantage, no?
Exactly. Now, when I first read it, I thought it was a spoof. I thought somebody had spoofed Jonathan Swift. But it was a serious memorandum written by Lawrence Summers, the grandson of Samuelson, whose textbook we all read in economics classes. And Lawrence Summers, highly respected till today, right? In the the actual racism in the proposal. Like Africa is a home of trash. Vietnam is a home of trash. China is a home of trash. It's the racism of the thing doesn't occur to them. Like they think it's a perfectly normal thing to say. China can make money recycling garbage. It's so racist. Why don't you take care of your own trash? In fact, even in the US, it's highly racialized. Incinerators are largely placed in black neighborhoods. Nuclear waste is put into Native American lands. And in fact, in the United States, they created a concept called NIMBY. NIMBY stands for not in my backyard.
Okay.
NIMBY,
Not
in my backyard.
Yeah.
So the NIMBY concept, which is about not in my neighborhood, is now globalized. We don't want our enormous trash in our country. Let's send it to Vietnam, a country we bombed with chemical weapons.
As long as we don't see it. Yeah.
NIMBY.
It reminds me of the lead pipes right now. Biden is saying they're wishing to clear all the lead pipes right now in 10 years. And they have locals saying, okay, we're not doing that because they end up with some privacy stuff. And because lead pipes they use in lower income communities right now, they want to replace it with government, plastic, whatever. But when you replace it, you're not only gonna replace the public place pipe.
Yeah.
You're gonna get in somebody's home and start doing stuff.
Sure,
right?
sure.
People don't trust they don't trust U.S. government. They say, "Oh, we're doing good for you." They remember the black community of Tuskegee, right?
Exactly.
They're saying, "Oh, free vaccine," and you get, the stuff. So I don't know. Sometimes when I see those conspiracy theorists, I feel sorry for them. At first, I thought like these people are crazy, but after learning all the stuff, I feel like,
I see where you're coming from, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's scary, right? You suddenly realize that, wait a minute, maybe some of these things are true. I mean, the issue is for us, the reason I always tell, when somebody will say online, you're a conspiracy theorist, I say, yeah, but except everything I'm saying is factually based.
Hey, do you know that we received, which I think is the highest compliment to our account on YouTube. So our account has been recently shadow banned. You can see it from the stats, that. And but there's a comment that says that this is clearly a China propaganda. I mean, I would love to be a China propaganda if we're supported by the government, where I would announce it 100%, I would own it, but we're not. So it's okay if you call us propaganda. And then the guy goes on to say that, but everything it says is the truth.
This is interesting.
And that's the best compliment ever, man.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with that? Yeah, I find this perplexing, because one of the interesting things about the US government as a government is that it's remarkably transparent after the fact. So unlike many governments, and this is really something quite unique about the US, unlike many governments, after 30, 40 years, they release their documents into the public domain.
Yes.
So, CIA files and so on are released. But there's a lag of a generation, which I understand. Why should a government put its immediate state secrets online? But it is actually pretty impressive that the US government just puts its things up online. I spend a lot of time, my free time, reading CIA documents from the past. I find them amusing, Firstly, in the old days, the CIA agents wrote really well. So, they would be in Iran, they would meet different people, they would meet religious figures, and they'd write these reports. They were extremely well-read people in the old days. Now, the quality of the CIA has declined dramatically. Their reports are no good, including British intelligence. The old days, the reports were fabulously written, almost like literary documents. Anyway, but, you can go back and you can read that they couped in Guatemala. There's like a whole section of the archive. They just tell you, this is what we did. It's amazing. And so the thing about conspiracies is that if I was alive in 1954 and I said at the time that this is a coup d'etat organized by the US government, everybody would have said, he's a conspiracy theorist. He's crazy. Don't listen to him. But then 30 years later, I write a book saying this was a coup organized by the US government, and they say this book should, be taken seriously because it's based on the CIA documentation. So that's one of the problems. It's a kind of schizophrenia. We know the history of the US government and its operations around the world. We know that. We know until the last CIA document was released, what they did before that. But the US government is very clever. They release these documents and say, look how democratic we are. We release documents. But then the last document is the last time we did something bad. After that, we've reformed. So you can never say that there was a coup in Honduras or there was a coup in Bolivia. They just deny it. Say, oh, there wasn't a coup in Bolivia. It didn't happen in 2019. But in 2049 or 2050s, if I write about the coup, they'll be like, yes, there was a coup in Bolivia. It's a very clever way of misleading people. So anytime you criticize the government and sort of what they say, join the dots, yeah? If you try to join the dots, they say you're a conspiracy theorist. Now, if you join the dots, historically, you're a historian. It also begs another problem, which is that there are some people who are in our world who join the dots with crayons. They exaggerate the dots, and then they make those of us who are joining the dots carefully appear crazy.
Look like,
Yeah, because we get associated with them. So I always tell our friends who are joining the dots with crayons, take it easy. You don't need to exaggerate things. It's bad enough. You know, the US government arming Israel and letting Israel conduct a genocide is bad enough. You don't need to then say, oh, this, that, and the other, you know, reality is clear enough.
You've been to, yesterday you said you've been to 4 Middle Eastern countries this year. Where did you go?
Well, I went to the Gulf states,
Okay.
and I was in Egypt briefly.
Okay.
I mean, this has been a hard year to, you know, to be a journalist and want to go to Gaza is a difficult situation. It's hard to get permission to go into Gaza. I went to Gaza in 2014, and I was surprised by two things then. One is even that destruction in just a few weeks of Israeli bombing was intense. But the other was that Gaza was not what I imagined. It's actually a beautiful place. It's on the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Palestinians have built universities, you know, for God's sake, malls.
When was
you
the
know,
last time you were there?
2014.
2014.
Malls, and, you know, was a highly developed place. You know, middle class neighborhoods. You know, the Palestinians have a high rate of education. It's an important part of their, you know, the culture that they've developed as a people in exile. You know, if you lose your land, if an entire population loses its land, the only coin you have is education. You know, imagine if a whole population is exiled, yeah, and you don't have access to land as a grounding for your wealth, and you know you don't have family wealth because you lost your house and you lost this that. You're going to insist that education is where your children go. So Palestinians have a high rate of education, which is why you see so many doctors being killed, so many scientists. You know, Gaza has so many scientists. You walk in Gaza City and there's art galleries. You know, Gaza was not a large slum. It's a wrong imagination. It was middle class neighborhoods, and what the Israelis have been bombing are multi-story buildings
Right.
where entire families are perishing. You know, these are all constructed by the Palestinians. You know, they have engineering skills and this, that, and the other. But I was keen to. I've been reporting this war as much as I can from outside. I have, you know, friends and contacts in Gaza. Some of them unfortunately killed this year. But you know, like, it is a painful conflict because, you know, in China the numbers are not going to mean much. 50,000 dead, 60,000 dead. You know, in a country 1.4 billion, India the same size. You know, 50,000 doesn't sound like a lot of people. You know, but you got to remember that 400 families have been wiped out. If you put it like that, it's different. Imagine your entire family wiped out. You know, your cousins, your uncles, your whole line from your great grandparents down is gone.
Well, I'm a social influencer, so what I'm finding out is people are getting tired with numbers, even with graphics, and due to social platform restrictions, they're not allowed to put those, you know, pictures, whatever. They either get demonetized or you just get banned. So a lot of influencers on YouTube, I know, my good friends, their accounts got deleted. I've never seen these
Deleted for
deleted for, I don't know, maybe called anti-Semitism. So it's Google and whatever. So it's really a dilemma. So I know it's I see there's a urgent need to tell my audience what's actually going on, but there's too many difficulties for social influencer to put this. It's sad. Okay, it's not easy to sell goods, which is the mainly where I get revenue, right?
Correct.
And people say, "Oh, we've been tired working all day. We don't want to hear that much about I don't know, whatever small place and at the other side of the earth. I want to hear something about my life. I want to listen to whatever next to me, nearby, not something far away." So it's all difficulties, challenging influencers, I believe I've encountered and they should have encountered throughout the world. Yeah.
But you would say that in China, generally, like honestly, the public opinion is on the side of the Palestinians, would you say?
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of Indian people, of course, support Palestine, but for some reason, the Modi government is supporting Israel at the same time. So
No, I mean in China. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah, in
public
China.
opinion,
Yeah, Palestine.
Because I was speaking to some friends outside of China. I mean, they just assume that okay, there is no public opinion in China because the Chinese government has chosen to sympathize with the Palestinians. So you just assume but I'm asking like generally, honestly, we've done a survey. I think you helped us promote, and it was like literally like 100%, 99.9% supporting Palestinians. And so we ran it. Obviously, it's a biased sample because it's within our.
No, but that's still a sample.
Yeah.
I mean, let's think about a parallel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say the Chinese Communist Party, founded in the 1920s, goes through its ups and downs. The communists and the Red Army decide to go on the Long March. Yeah. The war breaks out with the Japanese, 1937. And then the revolution takes place in 49. It's like a 25-year journey. Yeah. Long journey. In the middle of that, a bunch of Americans come to China. Edgar Snow spends a long time with Mao Zedong, plus his wife is there. Writes a remarkable book, Red Star Over China. And he's not the only one. There are 4 or 5 people who come and write books about the Chinese Revolution. They stay with the Chinese Revolution. Anna Louise Strong writes journalistic articles, also writes a couple of books. Nobody said to them, this is exhausting. Millions of people dying in the war and fighting against Japanese fascism. Let's just tell our own next door story. The government of the independence fighters in India, Nehru and others, sent an ambulance to support the Chinese struggle against the Japanese. In India, there were a number of Chinese writers who were very well regarded and wrote regularly on what was happening here. Nehru raised the question of the immense courage of the Chinese people in fighting against Japanese imperialism. I mean, that went on for decades. And nobody then said in India or Europe, we're getting tired of this story. Let's not focus on Mao Zedong. They're up there in Yan'an. Let's just avoid them. No, people kept coming to Yan'an to say, what's going on here? And millions of people dying. The courage of the Chinese people to battle against the Japanese at the time was inspirational to the world. The Second World War in China was longer than in Europe. It starts in 1937 and really it ends in 1949. 45 is not the end because those 4 years, okay, you call it a civil war, but it was also a lot of, and I would even argue that the war in Korea is even a continuation. But in Europe, it's from 1939 to 1945. And yes, 25 million Russians die in Stalingrad, the battles and so on. Lots of people died there as well. But we never ever said in the Indian freedom movement that, it's getting tiring. Let's stop hearing about China. No, we must continue because the struggle for human emancipation has no limit. There is no sell by date. And I agree with you that one of the problems of the structure of the internet media is that it's feel-good content that gets monetized. I very much agree with you. It's hard to get away from that. But look at this lovely mug with a cat going through a watermelon. Watermelon is the symbol of Palestine. So, maybe this,
We actually had this mug long before the recent war broke out. So somebody foresaw everything, I suppose.
Well, I suppose so, and I would monetize this and say it's a pro-Palestinian kitties for Palestine.
No, you can get arrested in Britain, I believe. If you hold a piece of watermelon and you get a treat.
Because these are the colors of the Palestinian flag.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is the way this worked out is that there were many countries where the Palestinian flag was banned. Many countries, and so the watermelon stood in for the flag. What was dumb about banning the flag is the flag is a symbol. You can't ban what's behind the symbol. You know, you can ban a symbol, but you can't ban what's behind the symbol. That's impossible. You know, you'd have to incarcerate millions of people. You know, if you want to stop people from saying, "Well, I stand with the Palestinians," but fatigue, you know, war fatigue, it's a real thing. I mean, I've covered a lot of conflicts, Iraq and so on, and editors will tell you, you know, nobody wants to read these stories anymore. There's fatigue. And at that point, one has to be creative in telling stories as well. You know, so in this last year, I've done a lot of stories. I did a story about noise, you know, because that's important, you know. Parents, middle-class parents, but also all other parents, you know, when you have a child, you want the child to go to sleep at night in silence. You tell them a story, you give them a bath, you know, everything is, put the lights down, you sit with them for a few minutes and you leave the room. You want silence. Palestinian children are sleeping through bombardment because aerial bombardment happens at night. And a whole generation has had a year of trying to sleep through bombardment. They're terrorized and traumatized. That's a story, you know. It's a story that actually, it touches a parent anywhere in the world. It's not about dying. It's about the noise, you know. So there are ways that journalists have to also be creative to be able to continue to interest people. You know, so one of the things I had to learn was what's the sound of a bomb going off, you know, as opposed to say a car driving by. A car, so many decibels, yeah, and sometimes you say, my God, that we live on a road, it's so noisy, we'll put a white noise machine for our kids. Well, a sound of a bomb is 1,000,000 times more than a car in terms of decibel levels. And I'm talking about a bomb dropping 1 or 2 kilometers away, because it's the sound waves that travel. You know, that's what a journalist has to do, is we have to keep trying to find ways to tell the stories that are meaningful to us. And editors, man, you have no idea how editors can be, because I worked in the print media and they tell you directly, you know, your stories, advertisers don't want to fill the international page with your stories. Directly. You talked about monetizing. They
Well,
say
YouTube
directly.
also tell me that the ads don't want to put on your page because you're telling too many sorrow stuff.
And in China, he's like a multi-million to like all social media platforms combined to 10 million or something. And as we were saying earlier, there is no way to monetize other than, you know, trying to sell some products. And you know, they don't want to be associated with war pictures. I mean, how do you put up war pictures and kids dying and say that buy this can of orange juice or something? So, yeah, it's a difficult world.
Yeah.
I feel like telling story, IDF been doing a very good example on that. I mean, Yahya Sinwar, you know, his death. So at the first time, there were propaganda in saying he's a terrorist, right, in Security Council. But after learning that from his death, that he was living with only 2 or 3 soldiers without eating for 3 days. So I guess it's very interesting because some platforms are advocating for IDF propaganda, but they're not realizing that propaganda from IDF actually helping people to know more about Hamas and Yahya Sinwar. So I don't get, the world is, you see, very chaotic. That's why, you know, the good people are trying to do good thing, but shadow banned, they're not allowed to do so. The bad people, if someone caught them doing the bad thing, but in a good way. There is a Chinese saying called 无心插柳柳成荫. Literally means you want to plant and it's not growing. You occasionally throw something, whatever, wherever, and grow into a very good, you know, park, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, this begs 1,000,000 questions, okay? Because one is, there is an information order that exists there, you know. It's fascinating how the you know, Facebook, for instance, dominates the world transmission of knowledge. Now, I understand that, you know, China is slightly different because, you know, the Great Wall of Mandarin has created its own apps and its own social ecology of media, yeah? And so people don't use the Facebook and Meta products as much, although they do use it a little, but not as much. But in the rest of the world, these things are quite influential and important. But it's not just that, it's the hardware. I live in Santiago in Chile. For me to talk to you, information has to go from my house in Santiago down a cable that goes to Los Angeles, and then the cable that goes across the Pacific. The cable that goes from Santiago to Los Angeles is owned by a private company. Now, they could easily say that, either these 10 accounts or any metadata, you use these words, will slow it down. They don't need to ban. What is shadow banning? Shadow banning isn't a ban. It just means that things are slowed down for you. So that if you and I are doing an interview and I'm in Santiago, my internet is slowed down. So it becomes difficult for us to do this properly. So we just have to say, well, you'll have to say, look, I'm no longer going to talk to you. There are many different ways in hardware. And then software is important. Even people I know, they feel like, well, okay, I like reading you, but in the morning when I wake up, I go to BBC to check the news. I don't go to you to check the news. I go to BBC to check the news. Or I go to CNN or, something or the other. This is fascinating. The colonial grip on our brains, how many people wake up in the morning and they say, I'm going to go to CGTN to see what the news of the day is, or RT, I think if you're reading in Russian, you may go to Russian news channels. If you're reading in Chinese, you'll go to Chinese news channels. But, those who read in other languages, or whose default language is one of the European languages, end up going to these so-called mainstream, and even if they don't, and here comes the worst part, a reporter in China will, to find out what's going on in, say, Romania, because there's an election,
They'll go to Western media to find
we'll
out.
go to Reuters. We'll read the Reuters wire, we'll read the Agence France-Presse wire, we'll read the Associated Press wire in order to write their story. Because they don't have contacts and sources. So even their stories in Chinese, in Russian, in Hindi, totally defined by the Western media. So we have an uphill task, And I must say that, even when big countries like China and Russia are the two that have actually, and Qatar are the three countries that have tried to build international media. Al Jazeera, CGTN, and RT. These are three countries that have tried to build. Even they haven't really been able to build very good footprints around the world. So Al Jazeera is largely Arab reporting. The rest of their reporting, they have one guy in Africa, somebody, it's nothing. Chinese media is similar. There's just not enough of a footprint. Chinese media reports the US better than it reports South America. Xi Jinping was in Peru to open a port. I don't know how much news coverage there was of that. $3.6 billion port, 18 berth, very important development. But the news stories I saw didn't talk about the fact that just a few years ago, the attempt to build a port in El Salvador was stopped. Why weren't these things brought together? Because journalists don't have a longitudinal history of following these things in our countries. And this gives us a problem because then you just absorb the stories from the Associated Press. So when are we going to get confident not to be like second order reporters, but to make, to be the references?
Is that a part of the reason why, a lot been talked about at the conference yesterday, that the mood in the global south is shifting, like people are sort of united in what they are against, but effectively what is the new world order, what are the new narratives going to look like? It's very difficult to build solidarity around that. Is that part of the reason why?
Part of it is that we just don't yet have the full confidence. Just to be very blunt with you.
Yeah, one of the key takeaway from the conference yesterday is like, what if you don't have the capacity to build a capacity? Right?
Exactly. Right? I mean, you have a channel, there's two channels, yeah? How many people outside China will spend time watching what you're saying? You have to have an ambition to have millions of people outside China watch what I don't make media for India. I want viewers and readers from Romania, from Azerbaijan. We built a syndication service called Globetrotter, which I work for. I'm the chief correspondent. What we do in Globetrotter is, Shaoli, you will write for me an article, 1,000 words, yeah, on something that you've seen.
I remember you told me about that. Yeah,
and we syndicate it for free, and 400 publications around the world can use it. And they do. They do it in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia. They print it. Asia Times in Bangkok, La Jornada, one of the major papers in Mexico, prints our material in there. And it's free. It's basically like somewhere between an op-ed, an editorial, and a report.
Basically, you source from reporters or editors from around the world who can reflect the sentiment on the ground.
Yes.
Right?
So you have to learn to write about China for an audience in Mexico, in other places, and so on. So, but it's not like you're not writing for a 3-year-old. You don't have to explain everything. But the point is, we're trying to compete with a different form of journalism with the wires. And obviously, we don't have the capacity. Like, we can't release 10 stories a day. We release 3 or 4 a week maximum. Yeah. But I want to get to the point where we release 10, 12, 15 stories a day. Like, what's the biggest story today in China? Why haven't you written the 1,000-word piece? Okay, right now it's written, it's print, web and print journal. But eventually, why can't we think about doing some sort of video content where you report? And now you say, well, what about languages? There's a lot of AI tools that we can use, to try to dub.
Could you source more from our website and our video channels?
Well, we don't do video yet.
Oh, okay.
But
we have articles on our website.
Let's take it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I mean, we started a journal a few years ago where we made a partnership with Wenhua Zhongheng, with editor Yan Ping, and said, okay, you have a journal in China. Well, I think that Chinese intellectuals of a certain sort are not listened to outside China. In other words, Western, think tanks and so on have relationships with Chinese intellectuals. It's not like no Chinese intellectual is read outside, but these are typically Western-oriented intellectuals that will be published by the Brookings Institute and by the Council for Foreign Relations in the US and by, some foundation in Europe and so on. These are Western-oriented intellectuals, and China is filled with Western-oriented intellectuals. Well, it's just a factual.
Don't we know that?
Yeah, it's a factual statement. Yeah, no judgment.
And so many in the Chinese government too. The bureaucracy.
Well, you know better than I on that. No comment.
Agree with me.
No comment. Certainly in the academy, it's there because I read them. In these mainstream books and so on. But there are a whole other bunch of intellectuals who are interested in developing different lines. They don't have to be anti-US or anti-anybody. There are people who are interested in what's going on in Africa. What's China's role in Africa? What does it mean to build an ecological China and so on? So with Wenhua, we said, look, you have a nice magazine, but we want to make an English, Spanish, Portuguese edition, an international edition, because we would like Chinese intellectuals' views to be out there. So we made it. We're on the 2nd year of this project. I feel the same about journalism. Like, where are the commentators, the people who we train, together to be serious reflectors? Okay, there's a, some speech given by a political leader or important meeting that could be reported. But more interesting to me is that there's a village in China where there's a football league. That's an interesting story,
that's an interesting story.
Why is that interesting? It's captivating. It tells you about rural revitalization, abolition of poverty. It tells you about how women dominate in the rural areas. You can beg the question, if there's so many women leaders at the rural areas, why aren't they in Beijing? And so on. It's great stories. We need those, you know. I mean, I'm very much opposed to the gap between so-called hard news and soft news. I think that's a bourgeois distinction. There is no such thing as hard news. You know, why is the voice of a woman leader from a rural community telling you about how she's trying to improve the capacity or the potential of her people through using the internet for farming? How is that not as important as, let's say, a governor of a province talking about something? You know, why is her voice less important? It's as important. She's reflecting a reality. So I would love for Chinese journalists to be read, you know, in other parts of the world. I would love more Indian voices in China. It's stunning how poor our mutual reporting is. You know, in India, the coverage on China is appalling. It's all what is happening in small circle of the government. If that, people don't follow what's happening with much care. Similarly, in China, there are so few people. There's so few Indian journalists who are capable of writing for a Chinese audience, you know, explaining the realities in India. And unless you have more people-to-people understanding, you know, if the universities aren't doing it, journalists have to do it. Unless you have that, how do you expect countries to come closer?
How have you do you see the public perception about India here in China? Is it shifting? Is it better?
Well, it's not good because if you count on social platform, then they're, as I said, it's for ads, for revenue. Otherwise, the social platform isn't providing any currencies. So you have to sell goods. To sell goods, you have to attract people into your video by what? By surprise, by anger, by moods, basically, not by fact.
Sensation.
So I will give a very good example. The BBC got a fake news saying the boss CEO of Uniqlo, a clothing brand, he said, we're not using cotton from Xinjiang, which is totally fake news. The Japanese version, because the guy is a Japanese, okay, Yanai Tadashi, he told the Japanese-speaking BBC reporter that we're now not using cotton. Not using could be a lot of reasons. I don't know, they make very cheap t-shirts. Of course, they use synthetics. Yeah, they don't use the cotton. It could be a good reason. But the BBC English channel says the Uniqlo is not using Xinjiang cotton. They changed it to does not. So not using and does not is totally different. Why
And did he, in Japanese, did he say Xinjiang cotton?
Yeah.
Because it was a question.
It was
from
a question.
him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And after doing the Japanese version of interviewing, the Japanese-speaking BBC reporter actually faked another asking recording in English.
The questioning part.
Yeah, the questioning
Okay.
part was
Re-recorded.
re-recorded.
Yeah.
Like faking, oh, I'm asking.
Yeah.
This time, she was telling English. But the original video, she was speaking Japanese with the CEO of Uniqlo, right?
Yeah.
So I made that video doing fact checking. I saw a lot of video got more viewing count than me. They're just critiquing on Japanese imperialism for no reason. And even telling their audience wrong name of the CEO. The guy's called Yanai, right? His surname. The guy is saying, oh, Yaina. The order of the name is wrong, but doesn't affect. He's telling the anger to their audience, getting more viewing
It's a
counts.
very
than me.
important point.
Yeah,
See?
you see, I mean, people like the Chinese social media or Chinese views are being criticized as being nationalistic. But I mean, here's the thing: they're all. I mean, he is the opinion leader in China, and he is very rational about it. So the CEO of Uniqlo has always maintained that we're going to stay out of politics. The BBC lady really forced it, shoved it down his throat, and then in the way they put it out. Now, you know, technically they did not misinterpret it or misrepresent him, but the way they reported it was very misleading. And sure, the Chinese internet followed because, you know, you always follow the bad news, right? You know, somebody's against China, you know, they're boycotting Chinese Xinjiang while wanting to make money from here. And so they follow, and even with like sensible multi-million influencer like him, he put out very reasonable analysis of the whole thing, and it's very difficult to shift it. So
You see, Uniqlo should be sponsoring us right now.
They're not even.
There should be.
There
But-
should be. You should be.
Yeah, but your point is a really good point because it's interesting. You asked the question about India and he gave the example about Japan.
Yeah.
Because the point is what? The point is that our audiences also follow, the kind of political atmosphere. And it is much easier to inflame people into
Yeah.
jingoism
Yeah.
than it is to inflame people to understanding.
Triggering
much easier.
hatred
Yeah.
to sell goods.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful episode of China Now. From the cutting-edge initiatives of the Overlap program to the ever-evolving dynamics of China's role on the world stage, today's discussion reminds us of the power of collaboration and understanding. Thank you for joining me, Makiza Latifa, as we explore the story shaping our interconnected world. Don't forget, the conversation doesn't stop here. Stay curious, stay engaged, and continue to seek the bigger picture. We'll be back next Saturday morning with more updates, analysis, and thought-provoking perspectives. Until then, take care and see you soon.